Hello, everybody. Jim Leedy. Just want to let everybody know that we are going to record this just so we are in compliance here. We will stop recording during the documentary. Alexis, take it away.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. We really appreciate your willingness to give us your time and attention. And we're excited to be part of the Spokane community. We're doing this because we love it here. And we're just really wanting to create solutions in our community that work for everyone involved, that make the Spokane area a more enjoyable and safe place to live for everyone. So the panelists today will be Ernie Stevens. He is the founder and creator of the Silk Ed training program, which we are really interested in introducing this idea to Spokane, because we've seen that it's been working elsewhere. And it's been making things a lot easier for both police and the community members that they interact with. And that really got us excited and interested. He has a lot of experience as an officer himself. And I think that he is really easy to talk to. He'll answer all of your questions. I apologize, I had notes prepared and I had some technical difficulties right before this started. So I'm sorry about that. So we will also have Athena Grace, and she is a trainer, and Ernie Stevens' business partner, and she is so intelligent. She really knows what she's talking about. She's put a lot of effort into creating this program that has changed the interactions between the police and the communities in
Yeah, she's the co-founder of Silk, and
yes.
she has trained special forces and military folks in police department around the nation. And she talks about reading people, basically, visual cues, right? Is that right, Athena?
Yeah, exactly. Social intelligence, reading people, personality profiling.
And being able to communicate effectively.
Exactly.
Pretty awesome work. The other panelists that we have are Spokane locals. And like I said, we've just been working on this because we're passionate about creating a good community experience for everyone. And none of us are paid to do this work. We just do it because we care. So we also wanted to thank Kathy for facilitating the screening today. We really appreciate that, and we're excited for people to see what we've been talking about and learning about. We also want to thank Jennifer McShane, who's the producer of the documentary. We really appreciate you guys allowing us to screen this, and we're really hoping that it'll open up a wider discussion between all of us, and it'll kind of put us in a position where we're looking for similar goals. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing.
You.
Yes, thank you. So everyone watching can submit questions at any point during this. From now, during the screening, afterward. The Q&A will be after the screening, and I'm looking forward to that. I think that you guys will come up with some really poignant topics to discuss. Also, you can choose to ask those questions anonymously if you like. We want everyone to be comfortable.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexis. So we've got our documentary, Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, an amazing documentary. Ernie, would you like to go ahead and introduce that documentary for us?
Sure. Well, what you're about to view is 3 years in the works that Jen McShane did. You know, she came down to San Antonio and filmed Joe and I, really just doing our job, doing what we do. And 3 years later, she was able to put this to a film festival that released in South by Southwest in Austin. And the film did very well. It really, it's not a how-to film. So as you're watching this shortened part, I think we're going to watch the 25-minute clip tonight. Just keep that in mind. It's really a film, a documentary about human connection and, you know, closing the gap in communities that we've been to where there's been maybe a little bit of disconnect, or they just want to work closer with the police department. You know, this is a perfect opportunity to watch this film and see what we've done here in San Antonio and how successful it's been. So shout out to the entire film crew, Toby Shimon, the editor. She won an Emmy for this film. So I'm very excited to be bringing this film to Spokane and having everybody view this tonight, and look forward to your questions.
All right, so everybody can sit back and watch the movie. We didn't talk about this, but I'm just going to say before we watch that there is a scene at the top of the clip that can bring up a lot of emotion, just so people are aware of that.
Tonight, another body cam video is putting a spotlight on how police interact with the mentally ill.
I'm trying to juggle questions and get recording going, and sorry about that.
I have one if you need a break, Jim.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so this question is for Ernie. So with all of your experience as a police officer, and I didn't mention how long you were and how long you've been involved in that. So mentioning that would be nice. And also, with all of that experience, after creating and implementing your Silk Ed training, how do you feel about your job and your role in the community? Do you feel the same about your role in your job, or has it changed? Or I'm just really curious to hear about that.
Good question. So I've been a police officer for 28 years. I've been with the city of San Antonio almost 26 years. And before that, I was an officer at another department. And, you know, for the last 17 years, I've been assigned to a mental health unit, but part of those responsibilities has been training other officers. What's interesting about what has changed for me was when I met Athena and heard her perspective on introducing social intelligence and emotional intelligence, body language into a training concept that, you know, for the longest time, you know, we had what was quote unquote the gold standard here in San Antonio, and that model was being adopted all across the nation. But in talking with her, you know, it was very, very easy to see some identifiable gaps in that training of what officers could benefit from, right? And try to build better connection, try to build better rapport, and in doing so, kind of help de-escalate situations. So, you know, it was really a godsend meeting her and her expertise and what she brings to Silk. You know, she's the co-founder as well, and it was her idea, you know, to introduce this. You know, for somebody that's been doing training as long as I have, and being in a successful program, you know, at first the concept was, oh no, I don't know how they're going to respond to this. But very quickly, police department said, well, that's exactly what we want. That is what we want right now. A lot of CIT training, crisis intervention training, has been pushed down the throat of many departments, and they're just it's the same old thing, same old thing. Well, the creation here with Silk it's not the same old thing. It's maybe a hybrid at best with mental health and de-escalation. But when you're bringing in Athena's expertise and what she's done, with special forces and her expertise in social intelligence, it really opened my eyes and created a new pathway for training and development for police departments across the United States.
Thank you.
So going back here, I believe to both Athena and to Ernie, did we talk about the verbal judo there, Alexis, or?
No, not yet.
Okay, so the question is, what are the differences between verbal judo and active listening? I guess I should be more active listener.
So I actually have not heard of verbal judo. I'm wondering if that means using your words to send a message. I'm assuming that's kind of what it means, mixing your words and making it active listening. And that word, I think, in some ways is misunderstood, and in some ways it's antiquated with what people think it means. But there's a difference between listening and hearing. And active listening is hearing, which means understanding. So even if you disagree with someone, right, and you say, well, I hear you, but I just disagree. The truth is, and this is really hard, I think, sometimes for a lot of us to fully grasp, if we don't understand where that person is coming from and see truth and value, even in the side that we don't agree with, we haven't heard them yet. Because that person has a reason they feel that way, and it's a valid reason. So it's not as though we can say, I agree to disagree. If we agree to disagree, we weren't actively listening. And so active listening, again, it is hearing and understanding why that person feels that way and seeing validity in that. And that really takes empathy to another level. So, and it makes a huge difference. If you really hear someone and understand them, you build nearly instant rapport. And at that point, the other person is very likely to listen to you. And that's how we can all make a next step, even if it's a small or a large thing. So active listening is really kind of hearing.
No, I couldn't add anything better than that. All I would say to officers is, as you're doing that, as you're making that connection, just be aware still that there's still boundaries as well, right? That some behaviors are not going to be appropriate. So as long as you understand those boundaries, as you're trying to build that rapport and understand what they're feeling, I think that also shows authenticity that, hey, I am hearing you. I just want you to know up front that there is a boundary here that I don't want you to cross, because then it becomes another issue. So let's continue this conversation and help me understand exactly what you're going through, or what you're trying to convey to me, right?
I noticed that your approach, when in the documentary, your approach to going towards people that are experiencing a mental health crisis, it's definitely kind of a subdued manner. I mean, your plain clothes, your weapon's not showing, and you're taking your time. Do you ever feel rushed, like you have to? Does your job make you feel like you have to rush this incident, or this time you're spending with this person going through a crisis? Or how does that work? How do you balance that?
Yeah. So in patrol, the officers know exactly how many calls they're holding. So in essence, they do feel a little rushed. It's like, what do I got to do to get to this call, settle this issue, whatever it is, and get on to the next one? Because they have supervisors watching them. They're watching how long they're on calls. Other officers are saying, hey, you got calls in your area. You need to hurry up and get caught up, because I don't want to have to go in your area, right, and take the call. For us in this unit, we're a specialized unit. So we don't have that. We don't have time constraints. So the call that we're on at the moment is the most important call of the day that we're going to be on. So there is no, the worst thing we could do is really rush into it. We need to slow down, take a step back, and see the full view, and start peeling layers back of what's going on to instead of just getting a snapshot of the issue, we really need to take the time to understand, hey, this just didn't happen. We just didn't get here. What happened? What brought us here? Right. So I don't feel rushed at all. We get called the hug a thug unit. People make fun of us on the department at times, but it was very important from the get go that we established that we were going to be a plainclothes unit. And that's a hard sell in a bureaucracy, that doesn't like change, like a police department, to say, hey, we're going to put patrol officers in plain clothes and have them go out and deal with mental health crises. And that was one of the most biggest hurdles that we had to jump over, and then ask for a plain, an unmarked car. And because in the continuum of force, the very first use of force is your mere presence. And if you're showing up in uniform with an outer vest on, you may have some magazines on the outside, your gun, your taser, your pepper spray. It's very intimidating, for people. It's intimidating the way officers stand, because a lot of times they'll stand with their hand on their gun and their taser because that's a comfortable position for them. What they don't understand is that body language there to somebody that's in a crisis. And I've had at conferences, they tell me this: why do y'all stand with your hand on your gun and your taser? And I'm like, oh, like this? Well, it's comfortable, but to them, it can be conveyed as threatening, right? So we have the luxury of being in plain clothes and hopefully not sending that signal out, of showing all this outer presence of authority. We go in low and slow and try to develop rapport from the very get-go.
Thank you. That explains a lot, actually. Appreciate that. One of the questions that have come up is, we see with police officers, they deal with a lot of stuff, and they have to have a way of having some sort of help with that. What is your coping mechanism after situations like we just saw with the bridge incident? Who is your sounding board? How do you cope with that?
You at the time during the documentary, it was Joe. I mean, we were riding to work together and we were riding home together. So that gave us time to kind of decompress. We could take our time in between the calls, and if we needed a little extra time to talk about something, we would take that. His coping mechanism is always golf. So I know that I'm going to get the text message, hey, you want to play golf this week? And so that's kind of his outlet. As you see in the film, if you watch the full documentary, you'll see my faith is in there. You'll see my family's in there quite a bit. And I spend a lot of time with family. So, we each had different type of coping mechanisms, but we were always there for each other as well. And we knew we had to pace ourselves. And during the film, you'll see during the full documentary, Joe was going through a very difficult time in his life. He was going through a divorce, child support. He just had a lot going on. So I had to take that in consideration as his partner as well, of what is our day going to look like? Because sometimes he would come to work just overwhelmed. Hey, I didn't sleep last night. I had a big fight, and I would, we still had a job to do, but at the same time, I had to look out for his well-being, and so we just had to learn our boundaries for each other. We needed to learn how to lean on each other. But we were very open and honest with each other when we did share what was going on in our lives. And it was good to have somebody. I couldn't imagine being on my own by myself, dealing with these calls, and then getting in a car by myself and then trying to process that while I'm going to the next call. It would have been very difficult.
Okay. When you go into a police department for training, what are some of the stereotypes most common people have of you?
Of me?
Well, for both of you, I guess. Yeah.
Athena, what do you got?
Well, I'm not a police officer, right? So I would say the first stereotype police have of me is, how do you think you're going to help us when you're not a police officer? Not to mention I'm 5'2" and not a large person. So how exactly are you going to teach us de-escalation? And I think the key there is two things. One, there's a reason that inside the police force, if you already have everything you need, then you would already be getting this training. And so you need someone not inside of the police right now who has this knowledge to bring there, because it hasn't yet been established and taught. And so bringing in things from the outside to a culture that's very used to kind of being on their own island is new for police, but I think it's very important. And secondly, I actually mentioned this to Jim. I was talking to him earlier and saying, you know, a lot of people will tease me, as in, you go through some of the most dangerous neighborhoods. You live in DC, across the street from a corner where 4 people have been shot in the last 3 months. And it doesn't seem to bother you. Why are you not scared? I find that connecting with people's minds is truly the only way to de-escalate them. There isn't really a physical way to make someone feel more calm and build rapport outside of using your gestures and body language, your tone of voice, vocalics, how you say it. It's not what you say, and it's certainly not a hands-on thing. So your size really doesn't matter. And I think a lot of big men do think that the size, they can de-escalate things, and that's really just another use of force. So I think that those two stereotypes are part of the reason we haven't managed to get this type of training into police departments. And I'm glad that that is, once we get in there, I think they change their minds, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ernie?
you know, yeah, well, I think for me, you know, when we start talking, we start teaching, you know, they're expecting to hear the same old out of my mouth. You know, "Oh, you're a police officer, you understand, you know where it's coming from." But when I open up with a sentence like, "Yeah, you know, vulnerability is the most accurate measurement of courage," and they're looking at you like, "What did you just say?" And it's all about, we need you to become vulnerable. We need you to become authentic when you're taking this training, because this is real life training, right? This is the connection Athena's talking about. We have to be able to connect with somebody and not focus on the correction of what's going on, but the connection, right? And when they hear an officer come in and start talking like this, saying, "Well, hold on, you're telling us, you know, not to be tough and this and that, but we actually have to kind of take the uniform off for a second and be human being." I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what you have to do. You don't want to be robotic in your responses. You need to be authentic and make that connection with somebody so they can trust you, you know, and in doing so, you can change culture in doing that. You know, you talk about police reform, that's police reform. You know, it's getting away from the robotic approach to policing and actually making the connection with the community that you're serving and finding out what their needs are."
I think that's a very good point. You know, that connection. I've talked with a few people about my situation where I lost a friend to an officer-involved shooting, and I had a very difficult time trusting police and liking police, to be honest. I hated police, but after watching the documentary and going through some time, I've discovered that, you know, you can't group everybody together. And one of the things that's helped me is sitting down with people, such as people from the Spokane Police Department and from people from the Spokane County Sheriff's Department, and talking with them and forming that connection, because we see each other, like you say, but once you sit down with them and form that connection, you learn, you grow from it, and you can see each other's perspectives. So that's a great point, which leads me to another question, Ernie. How has your experience as an officer changed you since creating and implementing SILT? Do you feel differently about it now?
You know, I feel a little bit more complete, you know, when I talk about the training now, because there have been gaps in training. The training's been very antiquated for many, many years. You know, state mandates are state mandates, and they're check the box. Let's put this information out that police departments need, and we're good. This training here, it's not a check the box training. It's this is the best of the best, right? Athena is the best at what she does. You know, I've been training for 17 years, nothing but mental health. So we're hoping in departments that we've been to, they see it right away. You know, we've had the officers come up to us and say, "This is a training like I've never been through before." And a lot of them have been through CIT training, which can become very emotional, because CIT training can become very individualized, right? A lot of times when we're talking about suicide, it's affected somebody in the room. You know, when we talk about police officer suicide, it's affected many of the officers on the department. You know, so as we're coming in and we're discussing these types of issues, it becomes very real. Athena's got a really good way of connecting with the audience or the participants in the class, and really reading them and knowing exactly who's in the class, who's being receptive, and if they're not, why, and then going towards that, right? And that's where she specializes in social intelligence. You know, what's good about, me coming in there is just bringing that experience as a police officer, saying, look, I know the calls you're getting. There's a different approach to this. Let us explain that, because we've seen it, and it's been positive outcomes. And the chiefs of police of the places we've been have given us rave reviews with that. They're saying, hey, this is a training like we've never had before. It's moving the pendulum.
Thank you. The questions are coming in here, and I want to remind everybody that is watching that you are welcome to put questions out there. If you have any questions about the documentary or about our participants or anything you want to ask, go ahead and get those out there. Athena, how social intelligence can be used in hiring, especially leadership positions and promotions within the police force? So, for instance, with what you have taught different police forces and military and things like that, when you're hiring, how does that come into play?
So a couple of different ways. I actually just got back from doing this for a police agency on the West Coast in California. They were hiring for a leadership position. So I sat in with the chief, right? And we are looking for a social intelligence aptitude, whether you were born with it or whether you learned it, right? Because you can learn these skills. How do you interact with people? What is your social intelligence level at this point? Also, looking for different signs. Social intelligence allows you to read other people and to communicate with them, which tells you if someone is lying on an answer to a question, or if they are, not being honest or leading in different ways, which can allow you to screen for people you don't want, especially in leadership positions. While it seems like it would be too much to screen every single new police officer that joined a force, if we're able to pick leadership in a more, controlled environment, then they will choose better officers to hire on the front lines as initial first responders. So the same way you would use it in military special forces, just at a leadership level, to say this person does have humility. They are willing to be vulnerable. They're not afraid to hire someone that has empathy, and to look for these social intelligence skills as part of the hiring process, as opposed to simply, do you know can you check the box of what it's meant to be a police officer for the last 20 or 50 years. And it really sets another standard to determine who would be the best leadership in new leadership roles in the police.
I appreciate that. I think that is a huge part of it when it comes to law enforcement. I don't want to sound like I'm picking on law enforcement, because I do appreciate law enforcement, but when you go into the hiring process, I mean, people who don't work in law enforcement, we all work with people that we're like, oh, I gotta go deal with Jerry again, and I'm sure that happens in law enforcement as well. And so you do want to make sure when you are in the hiring position that you want to hire the right people. So
it's true. And also, if I add that, if that leader understands what Ernie was saying earlier about having time to finish the job, not be rushed, spend the time. If you find a leader that will encourage and reward the kind of behavior that changes police culture, that will, reforms, makes it, then that will help, because the leadership will be there to give positive reinforcement to the skills that we do want to see there.
Yeah, if you have that support, it makes a huge difference. Let's see here. Ernie, how has your experience as an officer? Oh, no, let's hold on. I've already done that question. Some more questions are pouring in here. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
It's kind of a follow-up. It's for Ernie or Athena, whoever feels like it's more appropriate for them. So what are the most noticeable and impacting benefits that you've seen for the police that you have trained?
You want to go first, Ernie?
Yeah, we talk a lot about the wellness of the officer when we go out and we teach, and it's very important. And we were blessed enough to have a chief hire us here recently that has instituted a culture of wellness within their department. So you got to think: is the officer that's going out on the street to respond, are they in the best mental health they can be in to give services to the community? And if you don't have a good environment at work that promotes wellness, are you actually doing a disservice within the department before the officer even hits the street? So what we've seen in combination with going out and training is addressing the issue of officer wellness and instituting those cultures of wellness and showing that, there's actually a way to do that and how to structure that. That's been really, for me, that's been the most rewarding because, I've worked 9 police officer suicides personally on my department, and it's become an epidemic here. We had 236 officers kill themselves last year and 44 die in the line of duty. So you can see that we're killing ourselves at a rate of more than 4 to 1. So for us, I mean, for me personally, that's the change of the culture that I like seeing is taking place inside. Because if you have a good officer inside that's mentally well and stable, then they're going to go out and do a good service to the community that they're serving. That's just my take on it.
And Alexis, I've seen officers respond really I think it's an interesting response from usually what I've heard before I started doing this was that when you go to train in a police environment, everyone wants to sit in the back. Everyone just wants to get the heck out of there. And what I have found so far is people staying late, staying during lunch, wanting to ask questions, being really interested, saying, I've never heard stuff like this before. Not only is it helpful for me on the job, it's helpful for me at home, which is kind of making everything a little bit better. I can focus more at work. This is helpful here too. To the point where I've gotten calls because I leave my number if they want to do coaching, my information, they can reach out because I do performance coaching. And they'll reach out and they have a lot of questions, even weeks after the training. And so I think that is a bit of a different response than at least what I was expecting based on what I had heard about the interest level. So I think when this material is presented, I think it's new material. B, I think we present it in a more dynamic, fluid, speaker type interactive way that doesn't include role play or anything corny, I guess. And it's also not death by PowerPoint. So I have seen a different response from officers. It seems positive.
Got a question here for you. Do you do a one and done workshop type training, or do you establish a partnership with law enforcement? What does working with Silk look like?
Well, the last training we just did, we're already going back out again in January for that one. I've already been back out to help them since then for promotions. Pretty much all the trainings we've done are, can we have you back out in a month or 2 months to follow up with more of our force? We weren't able to get enough people into that class. And like I just mentioned, we offer the coaching afterwards. And we're lining up some team building exercises for groups that we've already done training for to kind of help them take it a step farther. Ernie, what?
Yeah, no. So, we get asked that, hey, do y'all do a train the trainer course? And those are difficult because if we were to put together a train the trainer course, which is possible, basically we're saying, okay, we're going to train you, and then you take our material and you train it to the next person. But like Athena said, it's the delivery. I mean, she's an expert in reading people. So how is somebody that we just taught this material to going to take her knowledge and her skill level and pass that on? It's just not possible. So we weren't sure at first, hey, we can go out and do some training. And like you said, one and done. We knew right away this wasn't going to be a one and done. We've got a course catalog that offers a ton of different types of courses, but then we also have programs that are put together and programs that go in levels. So, we weren't sure at first, but what we've seen very quickly is we're being called back and calendars filling up pretty quick. So it's because police officers and departments have not seen this type of training. It's just not.
And I should add, Ernie has been putting together panels after a lot of our trainings that bring in mental health experts from the area, extra support that police didn't know was there. There are a lot of experts there to help. And so he brings them in. We make introduction with the police, run through the panel, learn what the community has to offer, and kind of connect them. So that is another next step, not even just once and done, but now you realize other tools you have, and we can continue to help connect with those over time. So that's been really helpful as well, I think.
Okay. Ooh, I like this next question. You guys ready for this? When it comes to the diversion process, how do behavioral health officers funnel people to services or therapeutic courts? And also, what is the relationship between behavioral health officers and public defenders versus patrol officers and judicial officers? So,
Great. Well, now you're talking my language. I love this. So, yeah, I do. I love it because, so, being assigned to the mental health unit, I have direct contact with public defenders. So if an individual is arrested for a misdemeanor crime and there's a mental health component to that, I can work hand in hand with the court during their pretrial services. So if they need to go see their pretrial officer, if they need a ride, if they need to come to our clinic, if I need to connect them with services, then I go to the actual prosecutor, who usually is who the officer is working with, right, to have somebody placed in jail based on testimony, and say, hey, prosecutor, I'm going to work over here this time with the public defender to make sure that this person doesn't go to jail. And I hope you're okay with that. Tell me what you think they need to do to complete a pretrial or community service on the front end. And if we can do all that and show stability, show no drug use, show a decrease in hospitalizations and an increase in mental health treatment, will you dismiss this case? And I've had 100% success on those.
wow.
So, for years, I was testifying, putting people in jail when I was on the DWI unit, the gang unit, and now to be on the other side of that and say, hey, I'm here to advocate for the defendant so they don't go to jail, because the jail is the #1 mental health treatment facility in every county, I guarantee you. And it's not therapeutic, and it's not therapeutic jurisprudence at all. And we need to get them out and in treatment. What we can show is, #1, you're going to make a huge saving to the taxpayers, because it's a lot more expensive to incarcerate somebody than to provide mental health treatment. So if you have specialty units, behavioral health officers, not just CIT trained officers, but a specific unit, then they can work hand in hand as a liaison with your local mental health authority and your public defender's office, to make sure that the patient is getting the best treatment possible and hopefully not incurring criminal charges on the back end.
Okay. Let's see here. Here's another one. Have law enforcement agencies been hesitant to adopt your training or training like yours? And if so, why?
I would say it's split. I would say some departments can't wait to get it in. They are open to this. I mean, I've gotten emails that say, I believe this culture shift that we're experiencing is the way of the future. And I want my officers to be prepared and to have that training and to lead the way. And then on the other side, we do get people that are hesitant. Usually what they say is, we already have this training. We already have all these courses. It's already worked in. We've already got it. And what I find is, no, you don't. And I'm not sure, but even though it sounds the same, or some of it's the same, what it seems from the training I've seen, and Ernie and I've discussed this, is the concept is there. De-escalation, or the idea of social intelligence, the idea of unconscious bias, but are the tools there? And I haven't, the training, but what does that mean? What is the difference between my hand when it's like this, when it's like this, when it's like this, what does that mean? And so if you can really learn the actual tools, that's different. Same thing with unconscious bias training. Coming in and schooling people on what they should be doing differently doesn't make them go home and change their behavior. But teaching what happens through a schema, how we learn things, making a connection, and then offering another point of view, that's where I think the questions come from. And so, Ernie, what do you, we hear that they're training it until they get our training. And then their response is, this isn't what we had before.
Exactly. Like she said, and you can throw in a subject like procedural justice. That's a hot topic. That's what a lot of police departments are training on. It's a concept. It is a toolbox. But if I don't give you the tools that are in the box, what good is the box, right? So if I don't teach you exactly what procedural justice is and how social intelligence is interwoven all the way through that course, and in between that is a de-escalation, that's what procedural justice is. But we have to give you the tools to present that to you so you have a better understanding. I could teach you in 30 minutes what procedural justice here is on this Zoom. But unless I give you the tools to apply during a citizen encounter, it's going to do you nothing. It's going to check the box for the agency saying, hey, we trained procedural justice, but is that officer able to go out and have a citizen encounter and actually utilize procedural justice and legitimate authority, being authentic and transparent, and make that connection and then make that bond with a community member? Are they able to do that? That's the difference, I think, of what we bring. We bring the tools, not just the concept.
I think that's one of the big things that makes me so passionate about this, and why I'm so involved in this. And it's because I look at the tools, you call them tools, and they really are tools. You're not taking away from an officer by teaching them, crisis intervention training, or facial recognition, not facial recognition, but expression recognition, and the verbal tools that they need, which I seem to be lacking right now. But the reason I'm so passionate about this is I look at what happened with my buddy Craig. I look at what happened to my friends that I've met since Craig's death, who have lost people to officer-involved shootings, be it whatever the circumstances. And I think to myself, if there were more tools, if there was just more tools at that time that could have been utilized, they could have saved these lives. They could have, made our lives so much different. And I think that's why what you guys are teaching is so important, at least to me, and I think to our community.
Yeah, and
the
I've
tools.
noticed also that it really enhances the safety of the police too, because if you can get someone to put their weapon down and back off, that is a really really effective way to deal with it.
And it's
and
not
goes-
easy. Yeah.
You just got to get past the mindset of, if all I have is a hammer, then everything's a nail, right? I mean, you've heard it before, and that's just not the case. Police training is evolving. You cannot stay stagnant in this line of work. There's always something out there to be looked at. But if you're not engaged in communication with the community and listening to what they remember, who we serve, right?
Mhm.
We serve the community. Just because we put a uniform on doesn't make us apart from the community. It makes us more a part of the community. So we have to listen to exactly what the needs are and meet those needs through, whether it's training, community-oriented policing programs, or units that are put together specifically for that, to make that connection, right?
And I don't want to make it sound like when there's an officer involved shooting that I'm the only victim. I lost a friend, That officer who pulled that trigger, he's going through some tough stuff. He or she. I mean, that officer is dealing with a lot of stuff. They just took a life, and now they have to deal with that. And so looking at these tools to make it where an officer doesn't have to make that decision, and has more things on their belt, more tools on their belt that they could reach for, not physically, but within their mind, to be able to de-escalate a situation. Because I can't imagine what it would be like to have to take somebody's life and then deal with that, go home to your family, and who do you talk to? How do you deal with that? So that's why I really look at this. It's not just about the families who lost that person who was shot, but it's also about the officers that have to deal with it as well.
That's yeah, I applaud you for saying that, Jim. I really do, because a lot of times the officers are forgotten about. So thank you for saying that.
No, you bet. It's
And
yeah.
no.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's taken me a long time to get to that point. I'm not gonna lie. I was pretty angry, but I do understand. We're all people. We all have the same thing. We all want to be loved. We all want to be safe. We want to be taken care of. We want to be happy when it comes right down to it, and we have to remember that. But we have to find a way to fix the things that are wrong in our community. Did you want to add to that, Athena?
I was just going to follow up on Alexis's point just for a second, and that I really, really believe that if at 5-2 I feel safe in my neighborhood, right? There is huge addition to officer safety by having these tools and their ability to de-escalate and grow that rapport. That rapport is what makes you safe. And as we've taught these, another feedback I've gotten is in line with what you said, where an officer says, I've been thinking about the things you've taught me, and instead of moving lightning speed and just doing something, whether it's pulling the trigger or I'm realizing what I'm seeing and I'm understanding what that person's saying to me. And instead of feeling afraid, I'm seeing that they're scared as opposed to about to shoot me. I can read different things, and that gives me more time to think. And that's one thing we see a lot is officers act so fast. And so that fear, it's not just fear anymore because you understand what you're seeing and what you can do about that. So I think that provides a lot of safety for officers as well.
I want to remind everybody that's watching, by the way, Ernie and Athena, no, they don't have to take softball questions. If you have follow-up questions, hard questions, they can take it. So if there's questions about the things that they're talking about right now, that you have follow-up questions that you want to ask, feel free to. I mean, we want to hear what you have to say about it, and we want to make this a discussion. So please feel free to participate in it, and don't feel like you have to ask any just softball questions where they can handle it. Right?
Bring it on.
There you go. When it comes to sustainability, do you primarily work with agencies that have funding for behavioral health units, or do you work on pilot programs or grant funded programs? How would you build a sustainable behavioral health unit?
So what we're doing down here in San Antonio, good question, because first it was the unit that I'm assigned to right now, the funding is actually from the local hospitals. And they fund 2 officers, 2 paramedics, 5 clinicians, a doctor, and office space, right? And then there's money for medications, transportation, ID recovery, documents, things like that. What they're trying to do is become sustainable to where they're not going to rely on the hospital systems to put together this money every year, right? Although there's a huge savings taking place now, because what we've done is identified the highest utilizers in the city, the top 100, gone out and pre-engaged the crisis. So now they're not calling for EMS or police and being brought to the emergency room. And a lot of these patients are unfunded. So the hospitals, light bulb went off and said, why don't we fund this to where the officers go out with the clinicians, pre-engage the crisis, and see if we can't lower the amount of admissions that are coming in, right? To lower the cost of what the bottom line is for the hospitals. And it's been proven to be very successful. But what the local mental health authority did, the clinicians that we teamed with, was billable services. So with billable services, as we're going out and helping the clients, now they're generating the funding to become self-sustainable. So there are ways to do it in program development. It just, for us, it needed to be kickstarted by the hospital systems here, who have saved millions of dollars now. Because the safety net, if you look at the safety net population, there was a gross loss of almost $1 billion last year in healthcare, right? When it came to mental health care. So this was putting, some forward thinking in place and trying to get to the crisis before it even happened. And through that, now we're building sustainability.
I've also seen it funded through community improvement programs just for the community, whether it's you could spend this money to build gardens and fountains, or you could build it. So I've seen it come from grant programs that are intended for anything in the community. I've even seen some police departments fund us, and I'm going to say this wrong, I don't know the right word for it, but seizure, like what's the word for that? I mean, when you gather things from someone that it was illegally
Confiscate.
stolen or some, thank you. There's funding in there. So it's kind of like petty cash, but and so I've seen it come from there. I mean, it adds up over the year, and they'll say, we want to spend this. And training budgets as well, but everything from grant programs to community programs to that petty cash, however they find it. And even some private corporate organizations that are trying to support police training to make a difference are willing to pay for this training as well for their local departments.
I've got a follow-up question to the tool belt question about different things on that tool belt. Are there some people who might not ever be able to hone those tools? Do officers go into law enforcement to become socially intelligent? So I think that's kind of 2-part.
Yeah, and
there are. Yeah.
On this one, go ahead.
Sure, it's a skill. I mean, I can teach you to swing a bat and keep your eye on the ball all day long. But social intelligence, I can teach, I said that wrong. I can teach you the skills, but it is an ability, right? You've got to be able to put those skills together if you're actually going to make contact with the bat and the ball. However, most people have an aptitude to be able to learn this. It's just another skill. It's like studying math or English or grammar, and you can learn it. In fact, a lot of people know the basics, but didn't have the words to put with what they were doing or the knowledge of how it ties together. So a lot of people pick this up very quickly. Other people need to study it a little bit more. And that's an interesting question. Do they go into it for social intelligence? Because I think a lot of us in the public, and I've been pretty open about this, I've not always been a fan of the police at all, would assume they go into it for the power and the ability to bully. I'm going to be honest, not socially intelligent, right? But I think that by choosing the leadership, which is why I think that social intelligence is so important when you promote and hire, promote from within and hire leadership. When you hire people with higher social intelligence, you will get more cops that are going into it for this. So as this training becomes more part of the police culture, you're not going to want to join if that isn't something that you actually want to do or be good at, because that's what you're going to get rewarded for. And that's going to be the training. And so I think we can alter that by making it, I hate the word mandatory, but a mandatory part of police training. We can start to change who wants to join and why.
You know,
I-
I can
ahead.
really relate to that because I had never ever even considered that as an option for myself until I met you guys and until I saw the documentary and learned about this this new way of policing that you've created. And for the first time ever, I was like, wow, where did this come from? I could actually see myself like applying to be part of this. And it shocked me, honestly. And I haven't had like a super terrible history with the police or anything like that. It's just I had never even considered it as an option, but I mean, this would definitely change that.
That's really cool to hear.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Ernie, did you have something you wanted to add on to that?
Just quickly, it's the recruiting as well. Go pick up any trifold recruiting pamphlet from a police department, and what do you see in it? You see an officer, a SWAT officer, somebody holding a K9, maybe somebody holding or riding a bike, or they make it look very sexy in the recruiting pamphlets, and you've almost got to change that and say, look, yes, we have all this. That's a very small part of what this department does. The bigger picture of what this department does is it partners with the community. So what should that look like in your recruiting pamphlet?
Mm-hmm.
The officers talking to people in the community, right? You should already be, the days of watching Cops and Live PD that they canceled and saying, hey, that's what I want to do. That shouldn't be who you're trying to recruit anymore. It's exactly what Athena said.
Yeah.
Socially intelligent people who can add value to the community that they're serving.
It's funny because when I got out of the Army, I was looking for a job, and I was still in the military, getting ready to get out, and I picked up a Border Patrol pamphlet, and in it, as I opened it up, it said, "Do you think running along the top of a moving train is fun?"
Yeah.
Like, I guess I'm ready for the Border Patrol. So yeah, I can see those pamphlets in my mind right now. Let's see here. What else do we have here? We have what makes your, let's see, did I ask this one yet? What makes your training different from CIT training that Spokane's law enforcement already receives? What is standard CIT training? In your opinion, how many hours of CIT training does it take before there's an impact in the community or in the budget? A lot of unwrap there, a lot of different questions there, but basically.
So let me start real quick with what CIT training is and the different models. And then I would like Athena, if you don't mind, talk about what makes it different, right? So the Memphis model is what most CIT programs are modeled after. And all that means it's a 40-hour course, mental health course, with emphasis on de-escalation, right? A lot of it is heavy role play based because that's part of the model. Um, an overview of mental health, right? So, but these are decentralized. Nothing is standardized. So, although maybe Spokane follows the 40-hour Memphis model, and a lot of that is based on what resources you have available as well in your community, a lot of them don't. A lot of them only follow maybe a 16-hour model or a 24-hour model with no role plays, and it's just PowerPoint. So, no two CIT programs are going to be alike because no two programs have the same resources in their community. So it's also who are you bringing in to teach? Is it all officer taught? Boring. Don't do that. That's a failure. Or are you bringing in subject matter experts to teach the subjects? Am I bringing in a doctor or psychologist to teach about psychosis? Or do you have a police officer up there doing it? Like you have to be intelligent about how you deliver a CIT program, right? So they cover the basics of what the Memphis model does, and the Memphis model as well really emphasizes only about 20% of your department be trained. They want it to be people who volunteer for the training only, right? In San Antonio, the chief here mandated 100% of the officers, all 2,700, get the 40-hour course, all right? Because we don't get to pick and choose what calls we go to. You know, if they say, hey, Ernie, you're being dispatched to a jumper on a bridge that's hearing voices, I can't say, nah, I'll take the next one. What else you got? Right? I don't have that choice. I don't have that luxury. So to receive CIT training, number one, I think is very important for every department,
Mm-hmm.
but still delivers a little bit of a different. Now, see, I know CIT well. So depending upon what that department needs, I can bring that in. But there are gaps in CIT training. And that's where Athena comes in and really solidifies the training.
Well, thank you, Ernie. I appreciate that. I think we both do. I think what Ernie mentioned on the heavy role play, I mean, that was a discussion we had early on. I kind of just refuse to do heavy role play. I don't see it being helpful. And I know that a lot of people focus on that, but it's very hard to pretend. It feels silly and you're not really doing it. So how are you learning it? It's not as though we ignore practicing, but we use exercises, right? Where each person can kind of do it in their own head, experience it, try it, but it's real. For example, if you're learning vocalics, a lot of things that people have a problem with or that during a crisis doesn't help the situation to de-escalate is the tone of voice that we're also used to police using. That tone of voice can irritate you, can turn you off, can escalate the situation. And so by using videos, body cam videos, with examples of how they have sounded in the past or just recently versus what it could have sounded like, right? And then being talked to in certain voices, maybe not vibe voice, but we play different voices saying the same sentence. And you can rate them. Which one did you appreciate the most? Which one bothered you and why? Whether to speed up or slow down the tone of your voice and why that matters and when to do each one. Those are things that are not taught typically in CIT courses. Again, those tools for the body language, kind of repeating what we said, but not the concepts, but the actual tools. Those are things that we really do differently. Even with unconscious bias, we will run through, Ernie has some exercises that will make you stop and say, oh man, I did have a bias. I didn't even realize I had a bias. And it's for every single person in that room, right? It doesn't apply to one person and not another. So what we're doing is very interactive, and also it's really giving you that hands-on ability to walk out and do it. And I think that that is shown in the amount of questions we get. When you really are learning something you're interested in, you want to ask questions. When you've zoned out, you're not participating, you're not asking questions. So I think you also might have asked how long. I mean, what is a number of hours of CIT training?
Yeah, it was it was training. Does it take how many hours of CIT training does it take before there's an impact in the community or in the budget?
Right. And I know there's these 40-hour training courses, but I would honestly say with the kind of course we're teaching, 2 days worth of this type of training makes an actual impact and a difference. It makes you reflect on your own behavior. It gives you ideas of what to do differently. And I mean, I honestly think 16 hours, 16 to 20 hours can make a really big difference.
Yeah, in Texas, Jim, it's very CIT heavy here. So you've got a 40-hour CIT course that allows you to earn a license as a mental health officer. But in order to earn your next license as in an intermediate, you have to take another 40 hours of CIT training called the Sandra Bland Act, based on a traffic stop by a Texas state trooper where a female was arrested because basically she pissed the trooper off and then she ends up hanging herself in jail. So now you have another 40-hour de-escalation training there, in addition to 8-hour state mandated training every 3 years. So at any particular time, if you hit these trainings right on, you're looking at 88 hours of mental health training just crammed down your throat, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between them, right? What's the difference between this 40-hour course and this 40-hour course? Well, this one's heavy in role playing. This one's more, let's watch videos and study some of the topics that weren't studied over here, like traumatic brain injury, roadside interventions. So there's things that you can add to a CIT program to say, well, it's not quite the same. But again, are you learning the tools? I can teach you about traumatic brain injury, but if I don't teach you the tools on how to properly communicate with somebody, recognize and communicate, what good does it really do? And I think so there's no one answer of how many hours does it take, because we're super heavy here in Texas and it's still not enough because it's not done right. And it's sad for me to say that because I'm one of the instructors, right?
Yeah, it's a good one. Looking at this question that just came up, it's a very interesting question in a sense, how it makes me feel. When my buddy Craig was killed, one of the officers that was involved had been involved in an officer-involved shooting just a few months before, and so here he was, involved in something traumatic that put him in the hospital. I mean, he nearly lost his life. He was shot, and he was back out again, and then involved in another officer-involved shooting. So this question is about officer well-being, their mental health, and how we deal with that. How long should an officer be on leave after an officer-involved shooting? And is there a best practice on how and what that officer has to go through to be put back on the street after that shooting? I mean, they're dealing with a lot of baggage there, and they're not only putting themselves at risk, they're putting their co-workers at risk and the public at risk going back out there if they go out there too soon and they're not getting the proper help. What's your views on that?
Yeah, so here in San Antonio, it can differ, right? Because it determines how long it takes for the district attorney to clear that case. They used to be a very quick process. Now it's a very drawn out process. So it's not unusual for an officer to be on not just desk duty. Well, yeah, pretty much. They're assigned to an office for over a year while the case is being looked at and going through the entire investigation process. On top of that is what type of treatment is the officer getting or not getting during that time that the case is being investigated? How resilient is that officer to be able to respond to treatment and to therapy and to make that kind of comeback that's needed mentally to go back out? I've known officers that they can't do it. They've called me up and said, I can't return. I don't want to go back to the street anymore. If I can't ride a desk for the rest of this time, I don't want to go back. So a lot of it is a mindset. There's nothing, again, that I could say is the perfect amount of time, like 1 year, 6 months. It's almost impossible to answer because everybody's different. Everybody handles trauma differently, but they have to go through a fit for duty through psychological services and be cleared before they can go back. And that's the process here. Athena, do you have anything? What do you think?
Well, since I'm not, probably don't weigh in there, but I do think that it depends. I mean, there's a lot of variables there. It's kind of a tough question. Depends on the shooting, depends on what happened, depends on that person's experience. If you're a really new officer and that happens, that's going to be a little more traumatic than if you have had experience on the job and going back on the street to the same place. But I do think that's a really important place where coaching or therapy comes in, to give them access to having that additional ability to talk to someone, and having someone to talk to for at least the first 4 to 6 weeks back on the job, at least once a week. Requiring something like that helps you get a baseline on where that officer's mindset is and how they're doing, so that you can be sure they're really ready to be back out there.
You know, with crisis intervention training, it also makes me wonder about the effect on the officer when you bring them in and talk to them, because there's a certain amount of empathy and compassion that's involved in crisis intervention, that has to be there. And I've noticed, like, I have friends and family that are in law enforcement, and you know, I had one friend who was a police, or is a police officer, and when he heard about my friend being killed, his response was, "Well, I would have shot him too." And then another instance with the same friend, um, I witnessed somebody jump from a bridge and into the river, and it was pretty traumatic to me. And he just thought, well, it's just another day. Is there a point in crisis intervention training where you get a person who's been in law enforcement for a long time, like you say, that it doesn't have that big effect on them anymore, and that they're almost, not to say callous, but they just have to survive, and they're not feeling that emotion anymore, that connection? Does this crisis intervention training kind of bring them back sometimes, where they're more connected to the community?
I think what it does is it helps them become a little bit more connected to the citizen encounters that they're dealing with at the time during the crisis. You know, if you're walking into a suicide and you've seen, you know, I've seen probably 50 now, you become a little desensitized to it. Yeah, it's still heartbreaking and it's sad, you know, for the family, because my God, I know what it feels like, because I've had a friend commit suicide, and they're about to endure this journey that you don't ever want to go on. But at the same time, I've seen death so much now. I'm not, that shock factor isn't there, and it's not there for a lot of officers. And I think it's a protective factor that the brain puts up, you know, so you're able to continue and be quote unquote resilient and press on in the job that is going to demand that. You know, we see and experience a lot of traumatic events, not unlike people. You know, human behavior is human behavior, but at such a level, on a day-to-day basis, yeah, if you're not self-regulating, there's going to be some issues there. I've been advocating for a long time that officers should be mandated to see psych services at least once a year, at least, just to check in, even if they have nothing to say. But those that do have something to say, it's finally going to give them an opportunity to say, you know what, I've been struggling with such and such incident, and I haven't been sleeping real good. It gives them an opportunity, and that's what the officers need, is an opportunity to talk about trauma that's affected them. And if you don't have something in place that mandates that, you know, you're just sending them back out there to continue to experience this without really having an outlet. And then it doesn't matter if you have peer support programs or not, you really need to have that clinical part of it, you know, to make it work.
Thank you. Yeah. Because we talked about it early before. I mean, we're all neighbors, we're all family, we're all friends, we all live in a community and have the same feelings and the same wants. And so you have to have that connection, but you also have to survive. This one is, let's see here, we got a question here. While this discussion is primarily about mental illness, human interaction, and how it's dealt with, is there a gun culture problem throughout society that has everyone on edge and is an easy solution to a problem that police face?
Man, this is gun control. You sure you want to go down that rabbit hole? It's funny because I got asked this. I was at a film festival.
And the person asking the question just said, not an excuse or a justification. They just would like to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so I got asked this question. I was at a film festival up in Traverse City, and Michael Moore, the film director, had us up there and had us on stage, and he asked basically that same question. And I said, look, there's 380 million guns in the United States. There's 330 million people. Yeah, we got a gun problem. Come on, man. We got more guns than people. So yeah, is there a culture? You know, come to Texas. You know, on your 5th birthday, you get your first gun as a rite of passage. It's ridiculous. You know, so are people on edge? Yes, people are on edge, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, That's, that's a whole nother discussion, but yeah, that's my thought is people are on edge. We have a huge gun problem here. And I don't see it getting, even if you were to outlaw guns today, your grandchildren's still going to have access to these weapons because there's just so many that are out there right now.
So, and that's a good question, because guns aren't the only thing. We have knives and, a variety of different things. In the opening scene of the documentary Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, we see a man was holding a screwdriver and he was shot for that. Crisis intervention training, can it give you the tools to slow things down? I mean, what part of Washington State's Criminal Justice Training Commission, what part of their training they talk about are the four components of de-escalation of time, distance, communication, and cover.
Right.
Is that something, I mean, how do we make sure that that's happening? You have these officers rushing to a call, that adrenaline's going, it's pumping, you're going to it. You start getting that same feeling like when you're pulling your gun out on somebody, where you get that tunnel vision and sound starts to fade. How do you slow everybody down? How do you get them to step back and not shoot somebody with a screwdriver?
Right. So very early on, and I'll just speak for the training at the academy, and I'm not saying that this is true everywhere, but in the academy, you get a lot of firearms training, about 60 hours at least, where you get maybe 4 to 5 hours of communication and de-escalation at best, right? In the academy, you're going to watch video after video of officers being ambushed, attacked, and the mindset almost upon graduation is, damn, I'm scared of the community. Why do they want to hurt me? I signed up to serve the community, yet you're graduating scared, right? So how do you get them to slow down and things like that? I'll give you an example. Got a call one night, and tell me how you hear this call being dispatched. There's a woman calling in saying that she's sitting in the driveway, she's suicidal and has a gun. What did you hear? What word stood out?
Gun.
Gun, right? What about person that's suicidal? Did we not hear that? Like, what happened to the person? We focus on the word gun. So we rush and we get there. And then what? And then what do? We react to that. Yeah, I could put the same class together and put firemen in it and ask them, what did you hear? A woman wants help, but yet a police officer will say, I heard gun, right? And I get mad, and I don't mean to get like, you hear my tone of voice going up, because I get frustrated because officers will key on that, and that all comes back to training. Yet this is one person sitting in a driveway wanting to kill her oneself. She's not an antisocial wanting to go out and kill every police officer, but they hear a gun.
Mm-hmm.
In the documentary, you'll see that in that particular call, when Joe got there, there were 7 officers with every trunk popped, AR-15s, shotguns being loaded up, a shield. Even one guy had a ram, even though she's outside. It's like, what are you going to do with a ram, right? And they lost. I mean, what's the outcome? The outcome is you march down there, right, in this echelon formation, yelling his commands at her. She either puts the gun down, okay, or in the process of putting the gun down, somebody feels like they got flagged, so they start shooting, or she shoots herself. Well, can't we avoid a lot of these situations by not forcing the issue, right? Did anybody even try to call her and talk to her? I mean, she called the police, obviously, from a phone, so let's try to call back. And that's exactly what happened. And then using de-escalation skills and saying, let's slow down. Everybody put your rifles down. Let's try to talk to her. And that's exactly what happened. Joe spoke to her, used empathy, active listening skills. She put the gun down and walked out. And he told her, and you saw it on the bridge scene earlier, that we were watching it, when we told somebody, hey, you got me scared. Ask an officer, have you ever told somebody you're scared? They're going to be like, are you nuts? I don't talk like that. Why would I tell somebody I'm scared? Because you're being honest. It's scary to make a traffic stop. It's scary to go in and do a search warrant. It's scary to be a police officer. So if you will own that fact and be authentic, you'll have better communication with the community.
Thank you. Let's see here. I think my next question on here, let's see if I can find it. Following up on officer involved shootings and what an officer goes through and what they have to deal with. How can trauma like that affect the way the officer does their job going forward? I mean, what can we do for that officer, and how does it affect them, and what can we do for them?
We talked about it earlier, and Athena can talk as well. You got to have a culture of wellness for that officer. You have to support them, through this. I've gone to deputy chiefs before and say, hey, I've got an officer that's struggling with something, and really he just needs his shift changed. If you can put him on daylight, it would help out his family situation because he's really struggling. And I've had them look me in the face and say, well, if they can't get in that police car and do their job, I don't need them here. And it's like, my God, man, where's your humanity in this, right? So is there a support system in place for that officer? And it sounds like, oh yeah, we have things in place. We have an EAP, we have psych services. Do you have more than that? It's more, because if you look at the statistics from the Fraternal Order of Police, they asked police officers, if you had a mental health crisis, if you were dealing with something, would you speak out, right? Because we're talking about stigma now. 87% said, no, I don't want to lose my job. Another 83% said, I don't want to lose the position I'm working in, no way. And over 65% said, I don't think the EAP system we have in place would benefit me at all. So there's still a huge stigma, number one, of officers even asking for help. So if they're not asking, they're not going to have anything in place because they're like, well, nobody's asking for help. What do we need to have in place? Right. So I think if you create that culture of wellness first and let them know it's okay not to be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. We have to do something to provide services for you and support you and your family. You can't forget about the family, because this officer has to go home every day. Every day I go home, my wife basically went on a ride along with me that day, because I go home and I tell her about it. And I was like, she was there too. So what support system is in place for them as well?
Say that again. You said it's okay not to be okay, right? But not to stay that way. That I love that. That's really good. And so true. I mean, that's one of the things is that I wish more people would understand that, yeah, we all have problems, and it's okay to not be okay sometimes. You just have to find somebody to help you with that.
Sure.
Beautiful. What's it like going on a call? Basically you're vulnerable, right? You're not, your weapon's not out there. You're in plain clothes, going it basically unarmed, kind of in a society that makes it seem like you can't handle violence with body language alone. How does that feel for officers the first time? I mean, that's got to be pretty spooky going into a situation like that.
I mean, I think I can tell you definitely can face individuals with body language alone and de-escalate. Because I've seen her teach it and I've seen it work. For me, it's not that I feel vulnerable. I don't wear body armor. In a little ways, that's a little vulnerable because I'm in plain clothes, and I guess I could if I wanted to. I choose not to. I have it available in the trunk if I have a critical incident. You're right, my gun is covered up and concealed, but my mind isn't there on the use of force. If I need to go there in my mind, I'll go there. My thought process really is the person in front of me. What do I need to do to find out how we got here, and what, if anything, can I do to help you? Maybe you just need me to listen to you. Maybe nobody else is giving you the time of day. I'll give you my time all day if that's what you need. So plain clothes to me has been a huge, huge part of the success of this unit. And, we've only had one use of force on our unit in 12 years, and it was totally unrelated to any call we were on. The officer was walking out of the hospital and saw a man stabbing a woman in the neck.
Oh,
so
wow.
He pulled out his gun, and the man approached him with a knife and he shot him. And that's the only use of force we've had on our entire unit in 12 years. So I can attest that plain clothes is a huge de-escalator, and so many departments are just resistant to even look at that option.
Wow. So the frequency of death where the police are involved has been decreased substantially in both community members and the police force where you live?
Yeah, so what we did was, and I sent a 5-year study over to Spokane about our use of force, our complaints, and our line complaints. And as the CIT training increased here in de-escalation training, the use of force actually went down along with the line informal complaints. So is that causation, correlation? I don't know. I would like to think that the training assisted in that. It's really hard to judge that and say, oh yeah, it was the training. But I mean, if officers are learning how to de-escalate and have other options available to them, then I would just think that use of force would go down. And that's exactly the numbers we've seen over the last 5 years.
Wow. That's
That's
incredible. Good
amazing.
question, Alexis.
Do you guys offer parenting classes?
That's actually part of the training in a way, because a lot of it starts then. You know, really quickly, most people need a reason to shoot someone. So you need to feel justified, whether it's, and I'm talking, let's say you're not the police officer, right? Because you're going in and saying, how can you feel safe being unarmed? Most people need to feel that either you're going to shoot them or they need to protect themselves, or you're a bad person or or you're going to interrupt. Most people don't just, that's what the trauma is from. You don't really feel as badly if it was self-defense. It's not always true, but that is where the power comes in being unarmed. If you are talking and if you know how to communicate, you are making it really hard for that other person to use violence against you. Nobody wants to say, oh yeah, that nice guy, the one that showed up and tried to talk to me, yeah, I shot him. Like that's not, it has to say, I didn't feel safe, that guy was going to get us anyway. So using words is way more powerful. If someone's going to shoot you, the best way that they're not going to harm you is if they start to feel a connection with you. And you can't do that with anything other than social intelligence.
And let me add something to what she said, because that's perfect. When I pair up a paramedic with an officer and send them in to a role play scenario that we're doing, the paramedic is such a better communicator because he's not relying on everything on his belt, where the officer is more standoffish, hand on the gun, hand on a taser, getting ready for who knows what can happen. Now, I'm not saying that the paramedic has bad tactics versus the officer. It's just the approach is different. You know, they're always there as a paramedic. You're there to assist in a medical, capacity. So their mind's always there. If we would just think for a moment and think about how paramedics respond to a scene, they always have gloves on, right? Because they're assuming that the individuals that they're going to deal with may have a communicable disease. So they're gloved up. If the officers would just take the time to think, the person I'm about to deal with has probably experienced some type of trauma in their life, and now trauma and present time has collided and we have a crisis. If the officer would glove up their mind instead of their hands and understand that fact going into it, I think they'd be much better at communicating, if that makes any sense, what I just said.
Good deal. So we're starting to run out of time here. So we don't have much time. We have one last question here, and we're coming toward the end of this. And I have so many more questions as well, especially what you just talked about. But this is one that we want to make sure we get out there. And it's about racism. And it deserves a lot more time than what we have right now. But let's see if we can come up with an answer on this one. How does racism in a police department affect how an officer does his job? And should officers and let's see here. And how do we weed out racist cops on the force? Kind of a tough question there.
And I think me and Athena both can take a turn at this, because I love the story you told me the other day, Athena, about what you saw in the alley and kind of your mind of your bias of what you saw. Do you remember you saw an individual in the alley and your mind started thinking, is this a homeless person? And right. So biases and racism, right, can both play in. Number one, racism has absolutely no place in the police department. Zero. Does it exist? Absolutely it does. How do you weed it out? Through identifying it. How do you do that? Anytime we have a citizen encounter, there has to be documentation, right? And I understand if an officer works on a side of town that's predominantly Hispanic, they're going to contact mostly Hispanic individuals, right? In no matter what side of town you're on, whatever their culture is, that's what you're going to do. So you're going to see, number one, whenever we do a racial profiling contact, we have to put down the age, the gender, the race of the person, and what we did with that contact. So that's just one indicator. You can start looking at tracing statistics. This officer is stopping, 85% Hispanic people. Okay, well, he works on the west side of San Antonio. Okay, but now he's arresting this amount. And you can start, if you can show a pattern over time, I think you can look at that and do some counseling and say, hey, are you aware of, and it may be a bias. It may be something that they're not even consciously aware of, but it could also be racism. And you've got to, here in San Antonio, after the riots took place, we only had one really bad night here. But it opened up a lot of communication, and the topic of race came up and racism. And very quickly, we collaborated with organizations here in San Antonio and started having open discussion and going into the community and listening to concerns. And I heard everything from every time the police show up, before they take an African American to jail, they beat them up. And I'm like, every single time that's happening? Every single time. So we have to look at the data and actually look, are these things really happening? Because if that's the perception of the community, then we have to change that. We have to be more visible in the community and showing and be more involved in community outreach, right? To show that that's just not true. So it is a difficult question. Athena, what do you think?
I have a little bit of a different approach to this, and I don't know how popular this is going to be, but I believe in being authentic. So I don't think that saying, I see a pattern and you're being racist makes any difference. I think the way to do this is to connect and say, I grew up, when you have trainers that can connect with people in the classroom and say, I had a similar upbringing to you. I see where you're coming from and why perhaps you don't see this as a problem or why you don't think this is happening. And I see where you're at. And then say, I thought that way too. I didn't see this as a problem in my community. And then I had the following experiences and I saw this and I saw these other things. And now I see both sides. I see why you feel that way, perhaps to someone that doesn't think they're racist, right? And doesn't see it in the community because maybe they're not, but they don't see what's happening in their community because they see it through their angle. And so making that connection first, sometimes with someone that is more similar to you, rather than someone is more different from you, that person can then show you another angle and your eyes are open at that point and you're willing to listen because you've built rapport. They've proven to you that they do see the world the way you do. That is one of the ways that I think a lot of implicit bias training, people hear it, they go back home and they go right back to how things were operating before. And so if we want to make a difference, I think we have to help people have aha moments. And that comes first from understanding and then seeing another perspective and seeing the truth and the value in it. I think that's really important, but I really like to go about this in a way that will help people see what they hadn't seen before. And that doesn't usually work by browbeating people and telling them what we think they're doing wrong, but helping them see the insight in the other side. So that is definitely a deeper question, but I think we have to go about a new way of trying to help people see that.
And this is like a huge question that we could do a whole other webinar on racism in law enforcement. And HRAC would love to partner with other people around Spokane and the Human Rights Commission to do something like that in the future. Because this is just, 10 minutes isn't enough for that.
Well, and I hate to be the person that says this, but we're running out of time. So I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank our participants, our panelists. I want to thank the people who took the time to attend this webinar and this virtual screening of Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. It means a lot to all of us that we're all involved in this because we all have a share in this of trying to make change for the better. Because when it comes right down to it, that's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to make things better. We're not trying to make things worse. We're not trying to point fingers. We're just trying to make things better. And so thank everybody for participating in this. Like I said earlier, the documentary is free to everyone who registered. You got a link for it, and I believe it's good until midnight tomorrow night. So if you haven't seen the full documentary, be sure to watch it. It's incredible. it's worth watching. I've watched it many times, and every single time I learn something more from it, and I get a lot out of it. Does anybody else have some things they'd like to say before we end?
That link should be in the registration confirmation email with a password.
There you go.
Yes, and the documentary is also available on HBO Max, and there is a website specifically for the documentary. I don't have that memorized.
ErnieandJoeTheFilm.com.
ErnieandJoeTheFilm.com. All
That's
right.
my homepage.
Come on, man. Just a takeaway from me is, number one, thank you. Thank you for all being community champions in your community and bringing awareness, to trying to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. Thank you for talking about mental health. Thank you for having me and Athena on here. It really does mean the world to us. Please don't give up on law enforcement. I know each of y'all have mostly been through something very traumatic. We're doing the best we can to bring awareness to the culture of policing and change that culture. It's just the two of us, but we're out there and we're trying and we're doing the best we can. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for giving us the time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you
thank
so
you
much.
both.
Thanks,
for your
everybody.
time.
You bet. All right. Well, that brings us to an end. If anybody has any questions and wants to reach out, I'm going to give my email out there real quick. You feel free to contact me. I can get you in touch with a lot of people here. My email is theleighdty@comcast.net. So it's the Leedy, my last name, at comcast.net. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions or need to get in contact with people.
Or
Or-
the HRAC email that the registration came through.
Yeah, definitely. So
Yeah, everybody should have that email address, but it's humanrightsactivistcoterie@gmail.com.
Yeah.
And
Alright.
thank you so much to Curtis and Anwar. We will definitely be following up.
Yes.
Have a good night.
For
Thank
sure.
you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Good night.
everybody.